Hey everyone, Pushing Up Roses here, and welcome back to That Time on Murder, She Wrote. If you're new to this series, then hi, I hope you like murder mysteries starring Angela Lansbury because that's what I discuss. I've covered an interesting selection of Murder, She Wrote episodes, everything ranging from the bizarre to the intense to the salacious, and then back again to the bizarre. Today's choice comes from a Twitter suggestion that I found very intriguing. It read, "Hey, can you do an episode on the Murder, She Wrote called Unfinished Business? Season 3, Episode 3. This episode makes absolutely no sense and I'm wondering if I am just missing the point. Also, I want someone to rage with my wife and I." I clearly had to know what was up with this episode, so I watched it and can no longer remember it. It was so unmemorable that I forgot all of the details in the story and had to rewatch it. After my second viewing, I've decided that this episode is weird and slightly boring, but I'm going to attempt to dissect it for the lovely viewer who suggested it, so hold on. It's time for some mediocrity, she wrote.
You know what it all is? Garbage.
Because we're hopping back to season 3, we get to see the amazing Tom Bosley in his role as the laid-back Sheriff Tupper, as well as a pretty interesting cast for this episode. Lots of television and movie stars here. Right away, I spotted Hayley Mills, most known for her roles in early live-acted Disney flicks, and Erin Moran from Happy Days and Joni Loves Chachi. Don't worry, she doesn't love Chachi in this one, and for the better because Scott Baio is a piece of so you'll likely recognize some of the others as well, like Pat Hingle, who had an extensive career. It's interesting to see so many stars show up in this series, especially when it was still fairly new. The recap states that Jessica's friend, recurring character Seth Hazlitt, was a suspect in a murder 10 years ago, but the case had since went cold. Well, now I'm really into this episode. Seth is a fantastic character, and I love how he and Sheriff Tupper interact. As we begin the episode, we witness a homicide detective being honored for his good work, and as a retirement gift, he's given a trip around the world. Gosh, he looks thrilled. As he accepts his award, he says he has no intention to go on vacation and wants to take his time off to solve a 10-year-old case he wasn't able to close. His name is Barney Cale. Wait, his name is Cale? And he's a retired cop. With a vengeance. Word gets around to the suspects in the case who are all in a panic. Cale goes out of his way to call one of them, Cynthia Tate, featuring 1,000,000 bead necklaces. He tries to lure her to the lodge where the 10-year-old murder took place for interrogation, as he is intent on finding his colleague's killer. He implies she was part of some kind of scheme that went wrong, but she denies it, and she says she was just a secretary at the time.
Miss Tate, we both know what you were.
An elementary school teacher for a bunch of rapscallions. Everyone heads to Juniper Lake Resort, which is less like a resort and more like a log cabin you would see in a retro video game. There's already a couple there checking in, one of whom is giving the lodge owner a lot of grief for no reason.
What's the matter, Pop? You don't take cash?
Gary, please.
My hair. He has such a bad attitude, making his wife pay for the entire trip even though it was his idea, and ragging on this poor guy just for asking how long he'll be staying.
1 day, Pop. You don't need more than 1 day to catch a fish.
Huh, 1 day to catch a fish. Gosh, you'll learn something new every day. Meanwhile, back at Cabot Cove, Jessica stops by Seth's doctor's office because they had plans, but he seems totally preoccupied. He tells her about the cold case and shows her the newspaper clipping which Cale had sent him.
And I was one of the suspects.
That's ridiculous.
You're way too clumsy for that. Seth was involved in what is implied to be a bad investment with 3 other people. They were planning it at the Juniper Lake house where Lowell Dixon, victim of the cold case murder and personal friend of Lieutenant Cale, found them and threatened to expose the whole deal. Dixon was found dead in the lake, and the 4 involved in the BS plan were considered suspects. Jess flat out tells Seth not to take the invitation to go to the lake house, and he agrees, but we all know Seth is way too stubborn to ever listen to Jess. Cale arrives at the lodge, and my god, that's a lot of plaid. He promptly kicks the couple out of their cabin because he wants it instead, and I don't feel too bad because this guy was a dick waffle anyway. Later that night, Jess receives a call from Sheriff Tupper. Seems Seth has gone missing, but Jess has an inkling of where he may have gone, so they go to the deserted lake house to find him.
Looks like you were wrong about Doc being here, Miss Fletcher. This ain't Doc's car.
Oh, Tupper, I just love your completely unhelpful commentary. What else would you like to point out? The fact that it's dark, the color of the grass, the moon. So, this guy is dead? Yep, Dick Waffle Gary is found dead in Lieutenant Cale's cabin. Tupper and Jessica arrive just in time to find him, and Seth is still nowhere to be found. Tupper notices Maggie grieving the loss of her husband, and since women frighten him, he asks Jess to try to talk to her.
I'd question her myself, but
I'm really bad at this. True. Jess, being the compassionate, intelligent woman she is, comforts Maggie in her time of grief. While slyly interrogating her, Jess is very, very clever even when she's sympathizing with someone. A shot is heard and Jess runs to go see what happened. I love how unafraid she is. Most people would try to find cover, but she just heads right into the direction of the shots. When I'm in my 60s, I hope I too dive headfirst into the face of danger. Either that or I hope to have the sexual prowess of Blanche Devereaux. Maybe a little of both. I can dive sexily into the face of danger. So it was the lieutenant. He claims somebody had tried to kill him and was firing off shots so someone would find him. When he gets back to the lodge, he finds 3 of the previous suspects of the cold case there: Cynthia Tate, Dr. Mayhew, and Sanford, the lodge owner. Jessica is suspicious of Cale. Wow, that's a weird sentence. And asks him what he was doing down by the lake.
And since I assume that your question is no more than feminine curiosity, I'm even going to answer it.
Feminine curiosity? Ew.
Garbage.
I assume his attitude is the result of masculine stupidity. He gives a fairly BS excuse, saying he was just scouting out the area where Dixon was murdered 10 years prior. Tupper decides to leave, cause fuck it, but Jessica stays behind just in case Seth turns up. In the meantime, she engages in some snooping. Jessica is the ultimate snooper. Maggie, the victim's wife, tells Jess that he was in Cale's cabin because he had left a pair of sneakers there. Jess quickly speculates that the shotgun blast was meant for Cale, and Gary just happened to be there at the wrong time.
You catch on quick.
Oh, you know, feminine curiosity and all that. So, Seth is under arrest?
Seth!
Wow, Seth is looking rough. Seth Hazlitt? More like Seth has been. Okay, I guess he's not actually under arrest. The sheriff found him meandering about and had heard Jess was looking for him, so he just brought him back up to the cabin. So where the hell has Seth been? Well, of course he didn't listen to Jessica. He headed up to the cabin, got completely lost, then drove into a ditch.
Oh, Seth.
Jessica?
Does this beard work for me? Seems we now have a reunion of all of the cold case murder suspects. How nice. Man, this episode is frustrating. So far, there's a lot of characters, 1 cold case murder, 1 new murder of a person who doesn't seem connected to anything, and a lieutenant with the last name of a disgusting leafy vegetable. Since the sheriff is back in town, no one is allowed to leave the premises. The murder weapon, a shotgun that belonged to Dr. Mayhew, was found in the woods. Not gonna lie, at first I thought it was a large stick, and I was like, why did they bring in a muddy tree branch? Jess presses Maggie to tell her the real reason Gary was staying at the resort. He claimed it was to go fishing, but there was no gear, and he had just gotten out of prison, so there must be another reason. She claims she doesn't really know his true intentions, but she didn't press it because she was planning on breaking up with him during the trip. Tupper finally does something useful and researches the suspects back in Cabot Cove, but Jess is like, no. Look up the victim. I want to know about him. Still, props to Amos for doing a thing. She pulls out a map and states that the victim clearly went out of his way to come to this resort without a fishing pole, meaning he had another reason for being there. How many miles more, Sheriff?
69.
Nice. Everyone decides it would be best to check Gary's cabin, but the sheriff is being really stingy and keeping private citizens cooped up against their will, and Jess loses her patience and lays down the law.
Now, far be it from me to drop names, but 1 telephone call to the governor of this state.
Miss Fletcher? We'll just go take a look.
Damn right.
Just so we understand each other, Miss Fletcher, I don't care doodah about the governor or anybody else.
Doodah? Doodah? Catching killers all day long, all the doodah day. Everyone heads into the cabin. Ooh, free light bulb. Jess has an epiphany and begins setting up a lamp that was knocked over, much to the sheriff's dismay, who doesn't want anything touched.
Will you leave these things alone?
Sheriff, do you really want to solve this crime, or was that just talk?
Whew, savage.
Lieutenant.
Ladies and gentlemen, electricity! Turning on this lamp is supposed to prove that the lights were on during the murder, meaning that the bullet was intended for Gary and not Cale since the killer could see. But really? Am I missing something? In the murder scene, we can clearly see a light bulb was in the lamp, broken during the kerfuffle, but we can't actually prove that it was turned on or plugged in. I suppose if the lamp turns on immediately after plugging it in, it means the switch was flipped, and maybe the plug just got knocked out of the wall, but it really feels like a loose deduction. It makes sense, I guess. I just feel like there's a chance it could have been unplugged already. Suddenly, Cale passes out. Wow, that is one powerful light bulb. Turns out Cale had been poisoned, so he'll be recovering for a bit. In the meantime, a new piece of evidence is presented, a phone number that was found next to Gary's body. They call it, and it's Cynthia Tate's. She has no idea how he could have had her number, as they didn't know each other. Hot damn, this episode is full of dead ends. It isn't until the last 5 minutes of the episode where we actually learn something useful. Gary's prison cellmate, Joe Cabrini, used to work for the lodge and witnessed the cold case, so the idea is he told Gary about the situation, and Gary planned to blackmail one of the suspects staying at the lodge. Or something like that. This is getting a little convoluted. Jess seems to have it all figured out. Everyone meets in the lodge to talk about it, and holy shit, cool lamp! Anyway, people start taking potshots at each other. Seth asks Dr. Mayhew where he was during the murder, and he's all like, well, where were you?
Wandering around the backwoods somewhere? Who's your alibi? Bambi?
Hey, leave Bambi out of this. He's had a rough life. This is kind of where everything explodes. Jess figures the entire case out with 3 minutes left in the episode. She figures out the phone number was planted because it was written on one of the lodge's notepads. Cynthia had mentioned earlier that she moved and got a new phone number unlisted. The only person who could have had her number in the first place is Lieutenant Cale. He's the person who called her up to the cabin in the first place.
Guess that was a mistake, wasn't it?
You think? He also faked both injuries as a diversion. Yes, he poisoned himself. It turns out that he was a corrupt cop. The victim that drowned 10 years ago, a colleague of Cale's, found out that he was doing unethical things and threatened to expose him, so he killed him. Then he announced he was going to find the killer, but Gary Roberts already knew it was him and planned to blackmail him, but Cale also killed him, and he's like, yeah, I did it, so there. Right, final thoughts. This is an oddly serious episode of Murder, She Wrote. Seth especially is not his more humorous self, and there's really no cheesiness to be had overall. The acting is surprisingly good, but it was still somewhat complicated to follow due to how many characters were involved, everyone's motives, and the timeline of events. I was happy to see a cold case scenario, but that case took the back seat for the new murder, and then the solution came out so abruptly, then ended just as abruptly, and I was like, huh? Who? What? Joe Cabrini? Cale? I can't say I'm not impressed that Murder, She Wrote took on a more complex storyline. It certainly took a weird turn that I didn't see coming, but the only reason I didn't see it coming is because I didn't have all the information I needed to figure this out until the last part of the episode, literally within the last 5 to 7 minutes. I can see why the person who suggested this one to me was frustrated, especially with that sudden ending. After Cale confesses, he crosses his arms and he's all like, humph, then it freeze frames and we just get credits. Really? Do we have to end on this asshole smug face? Let's end on Jessica's lovely face instead. There we go. I would say if you like more intricately written mysteries, then you might like this episode. Just know it's missing some of the usual campiness you're used to seeing in Murder, She Wrote. At the very least, you get to see some awesome guest stars and Seth Hazlitt with a 5 o'clock shadow that looks like it could be soot. If there's an episode of Murder, She Wrote you are just dying to see me cover, please leave a comment. As you can see, I am very open to suggestions. Until then, happy sleuthing. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video on Murder, She Wrote. If you're interested in more murder mystery content, then wait right there. Just stop. I need to tell you about Patreon! Yes, Patreon, where you can donate small amounts of money so I can support my channel, eat avocado toast, and swim in my money like Scrooge McDuck while no one's looking. I might even do it naked. I'll never tell. If you can't afford to become a patron, then do consider liking and sharing this episode. If you can't decide on whether you like me or not, then check out these videos first. On the left, we have another Murder, She Wrote episode, and on the right, we have another Murder, She Wrote episode. Look, I've done a lot of these and I need people to see them, alright? Thanks again, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.